Well, Ted Cruz, having had his coals stirred today by Trump, he issued a response, and he had this to say. He said, discussing what we should stand for, we should be standing for freedom and defending the Constitution. It's a message of unity. In other words, those things unify us. And as I said last night very explicitly, the way to unify the party is not to scream and yell and hurl insults. I am not in the habit of supporting people who attack my wife and attack my father. He made those comments in the morning that followed his non-endorsement. It is interesting that when you look at, in the light of day, the insults that Trump had hurled at him, it's more than a day's drive to get to an endorsement from that, right?
Right.
I mean,
he's gambling. I mean, Cruz is. In some ways, some people were saying this morning, he's gambling on Trump failing miserably and then gearing up again in 2020. So other people are saying that actually what he might do is he may actually run and position himself in 2020 regardless. So he would actually run against Trump as I almost have to kind of say...
If we survive it.
Yeah. You know, but as a sitting president, which would be extraordinary because he feels so strongly about it.
Yeah, well, that's his own personal jihad, if
Correct.
you will. I mean, these two guys are in a personal vendetta, and it seems to transcend politics, although it's taking place in the scheme of politics. Well, Trump pivoted from that. The endorsement of Cruz and the non-endorsement of Cruz, and I wouldn't accept it even if he did offer me the endorsement, to getting to the issue that is on the American public's mind, and that is who was involved in the JFK assassination, and don't you think Ted Cruz's father had something to do with it?
It is point out the fact that on the cover of the National Enquirer, there was a picture of him and crazy Lee Harvey Oswald having breakfast. Now, Ted never denied that it was his father. Instead, he said, Donald Trump, I had nothing to do with it. This was a magazine that, frankly, in many respects, should be very respected. They got O.J., they got Edwards, they got this. I mean, if that was the New York Times, they would have gotten Pulitzer Prizes for their reporting. So this had nothing to do with me, except I might have pointed it out. But it had nothing to do with me. I have no control over anything. I might have pointed it out. But they never denied. Did anybody ever deny that it was the father? They're not saying, oh, that wasn't really my father. It's a little hard to do because it looks like him.
Again, Mike Pence dutifully standing behind Trump as he makes these points. But Trump is doing his thing, which is just like rambling and meandering across these topics. And I don't know what political horsepower he gets from reviewing this crap.
He's good. That's a great question. I don't really have an immediate answer. I'll just have to sort of do my thinking as I go. He's very good friends with David Pecker, who's the CEO of the National Enquirer, and he has ran a number of, let's remember Cruz had the mistresses, had the five mistresses, right? Which, again, Donald Trump had nothing to do with, but, they're good buddies. He had the thing about Jeb Bush, National Enquirer, the Jeb Bush thing about him having cocaine. They had the thing about Hillary Clinton was on her deathbed. They had a number, Ben Carson was crippled surgical patients. So there was a number of things, not to say that they're hand in glove and not trying to suggest that Trump was feeding him these stories, but they're good buddies. And so it seems a little bit too coincidental. So that would be the first thing. I think he sees it as a populist approach and a populist way to, take down his opponents. And that's how he sees it, as a war of attrition. And he doesn't necessarily see, and nor is there, look at what we just witnessed for the last 4 days. There was not one, I actually waited, bated breath for one substantive point, one iota of detail, of specificity. There was nothing.
Yeah.
There was nothing there.
But that, by the way, just as an aside, because you mentioned it, has been the magic of his campaign. I mean, in a way, his genius, and it really is evil genius, is to just come across with sloganism and let those slogans be empty vessels for whatever people want to put in them. So, make America great again, I don't even know what the hell that means, and neither does anybody else. It means something different to you than it does to me, and when was America great for whomever? Was it great in World War II when we came back to a nation that was still segregated between blacks and whites? Was it no? But in the '60s it was great. The '60s when we went to Vietnam and we killed 50,000 of our own guys, and how many of them, and never got anything out. You can't go back to the moment when America was great, but it's a great slogan, Make America Great, because it does resonate in some way in our hearts. Like, if you build it, he will come.
Right, right. And I mean, and that in some ways is a bit of is a concern, because if you ask the average person in the street, what does Donald Trump stand for and what does he want? He wants to make America great again, and he wants to build a wall, and he wants to bring jobs back to America. It's kind of clear. When you ask Hillary Clinton, ask the same person, what does Hillary Clinton stand for? It's not as clear. She has not got as clear a message, and that is troubling for sure for November.
Yeah. But to your point, he continues with this, and so he throws all this Enquirer stuff up because it's just, again, so much stuff. Some of it might stick, and again, he is dogged in his pursuit of Ted Cruz. And again, this is all Ted Cruz related. Remember, he's now trying to attach Cruz's father to the JFK assassination. I mean,
which is so preposterous and so ludicrous. And it shows the funny thing is that Ted Cruz is, as I said, he had the wives thing, he had the birther thing, and we'll come on to that in a second, and he also had the Zodiac Killer thing. Do you remember when people were saying there was that meme going around saying that he was the Zodiac Killer? And because people dislike him so much that people attach that. The fact that the Zodiac Killer first was operating in San Francisco in the late 60s, and Ted Cruz wasn't born until 1970, doesn't dissuade anybody. And it was so bad up to the point that Heidi Cruz actually had to come on air during the campaign and say, no, I can confirm that my husband isn't. I heard those rumors. He is not the Zodiac Killer. So it got so much traction. But what it shows you is a number of things. A, how much people dislike Ted Cruz. But B, it just shows you how down in the gutter that these ludicrous things will just gain any bit of traction. And Donald Trump is a past master at exploiting that and just relentlessly hacking away at somebody and trying to take them down at the knees.
It is a race to the bottom. I don't know at what point it's going to be enough. With Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump on the same platform and hurling insults at each other, I doubt that Hillary Clinton is going to get quite as low as Trump. I mean, I think he'll bring it from the bottom, but he might bring people like Roger Stone to bring it. In other words, I don't know that he'll have to utter a thing.
Right.
Some of the stuff that's coming out on Hillary, I mean, when I say coming out, I mean that's just being brought out. And Hillary's certainly a flawed candidate. Of that, there's no question. Sure. But the personal stuff is really rude. I mean, when you go after Bill Clinton and sort of suggest her complicitness in, or complicity, I should say, in whatever his sins were, I mean, I just think that's, at some
point. And the
point.
anti-Semitic tweet, the meme that he had, the anti-Semitic tweet with her next to a pile of money and the Star of David, and then he withdrew it, and then he said, I shouldn't have withdrawn it because it wasn't anti-Semitic. It's just, there's no depths to which he won't sink. You're right.